Oh, hey, what's up? It's me, Satan. Yes, I'm here in Southern California. Worse than hell, am I right? I've been noticing there's a lot of talk about garbage going on this month here in this corner of YouTube. Lots of talk about trashy books and despicable books for Garb August. Of course, it was only a matter of time before the Prince of Shadows himself, was summoned to give you all a true lesson in trashy, despicable literature. Yes, I'm afraid you are here face to face with the fallen angel in order to pay for your sins. Your sins of reading so much sex, violence, and mediocre cash-grabbing writing. Welcome to your torture rack, or as I like to call it, my hellish little library, where all of the naughty, naughty books from decades past are damned to gather dust once their expiration date has passed. Here is where I guard all of the horrible stories told throughout time. Here, all the despicable literary sins converge in rows and rows of trashy paperbacks. We have the prideful displays of misleading cover art, the greedy, exploitative premises meant as cash grabs, the wrathful, relentless written violence, the envious attempts to emulate and cash in on more successful books written by better authors, the lustful, gratuitous sex scenes that go on for way too fucking long, the gluttonous, addictive titles and covers that make these curious vintage artifacts so devilishly irresistible, and the slothful nature of their writing, with their boilerplate descriptions, derivative premises, and sequel after sequel of the same slosh of shit. Yes, all the sins, all the evil, deadly literary monstrousness birthed from the golden age of horror paperbacks is here, and now you shall be their sole companion. Now, if you'll allow me, I must consult the Bible in order to get a better idea of what exact kind of punishment a miserable, damned soul like you deserves. Yes. For committing the sin of showing way too much interest in these titles, to the point where the prices on eBay for some of these things have reached ridiculous heights, you are hereby sentenced to an eternity of having to go through all of these trashy, horrible, slime-dripping paperbacks from hell. Oh, but don't you worry. I will not be performing your eternal torture alone. I have recruited quite a few fellow damned souls who will aid me in exacting your punishment. They've come prepared with absolutely despicable books that will have you begging for a Penguin classic or a well-constructed sentence. I'm afraid, however, that in the world of horror paperbacks, all mercy is out the window. Oh, poor you. You don't even know what you're in for, you silly mortal soul. Your punishment begins now. Hold tight. We're going down.
whole lot of time to do an introduction, but I want to thank Juan for inviting me, because this is what finally actually got me to record a video, which is something I've had in the back of my mind wanting to do for years now. First book I went for was Whitley Strieber's The Wolfen, which is a really interesting hybrid of police procedural and creature horror with werewolves. And unlike a lot of werewolf novels, they're more dread-inducing rather than the psychological horror of turning into a werewolf or blood-soaked horror of them just tearing people apart. It has the interesting take where they're a completely separate species from humans, just living alongside us, preying upon us, in decline now that it's the modern era. And it has entire chapters from their perspective, so there's the interesting reader dynamic of sympathizing with both parties, the police investigating these werewolves, and the last of the werewolves just trying to survive in the modern era. The second one is my favorite cover in my collection, although kind of got murdered in the corner by a sticker. Don't know how well the camera will catch it, but each of their eyes have these tiny bits of silver foil, which is just awesome. And there's a little taxidermy monster ostrich down there, which is automatically 10 out of 10. So, despite what the cover shows, it considers itself a fantasy, and it is horror, it is fantasy, it's also kind of a gothic romance and occult horror. It's a lot of different things, but basically it's about an evil magical taxidermist trying to hunt down an American beauty model to preserve her, and he uses animated taxidermy animals, zombies on motorcycles, to track her down, whereas she has a British firefighter and the British police in wax figure form on her side. It's fairly chunky, so there are slow periods, but when it's going, it's really going and really weird. And lastly is the crown jewel of my really stupid idea to write a book about collection, Killer Smurfs. Really. It's about the 4-year-old girl, Heaven, being tormented by these Nelf creatures, which are clearly a play on the Smurfs. And what starts with the mother not believing her ends up with Heaven showing actual signs of being attacked. And over the course of the book, the mother teams up with her boyfriend and a Van Helsing-style exorcist to track down the satanic cult wanting to sacrifice Heaven, and somehow the climax goes into even weirder places than you'd expect.
Hello, my name is Greg, and my channel is Another Bibliophile Reads. And my paperback from hell is The Rats by James Herbert. And this is probably the novel that kicked off the killer animals genre. It was published in 1974. And it is a story of rats in London attacking people. And the author has this formula where he introduces a character, tells a bit of the character's story, and then that character gets eaten by rats. And what's interesting in this is that there is a bit of moralizing, I think, from the author. That many of these characters that he describes have, at least for those times, would have been considered abnormal sexual desires. Not so much in the modern day world would we focus on that, but it does seem like the author is punishing his characters for having abnormal sexual thoughts. But what it really excels in is the story of the killer animals, the rats. The main character is a school teacher. One of his students comes in one day with a rat bite. And of course, that teacher has to escort the student to the doctor, and the student points out where he was bitten. And things get worse from there, because these rats are not ordinary, everyday rats. They have been mutated. And that is one of the key elements to the killer animal genre, is that the author takes an ordinary animal, in this case a rat, and something happens to that rat to make it let's just say a super rat that can attack people in large numbers. And the rats exist in very large numbers to make an extreme menace to society. Now, I was discussing this with Juan when we were reading Slime by Halkin. And one of the things I commented on is that the killer rat genre really took off during the height of the Cold War, when people were rightly worried about being blown up by the Soviet Union. And at least my theory is that the killer rat genre was sort of a substitute fear. The fear of nuclear destruction was real, but there really was no fear in killer rats. You could take that fear and substitute it out for something that really can't get you. So that's what I think about the killer animal genre and the rats. And the rats is a very good story. The story of the school teacher getting involved, it's a little hard to believe how involved the school teacher becomes in a major government problem, but that's okay. That's what we have novels for. And of course, the school teacher has to encounter the big bad enemy at the end of the rats. And there's always something in these killer animal books that happens to the end where you learn a little bit more about those killer animals, that maybe they're a little bit special. And that's sort of why I like them.
Hey guys, Kobe here from the Book Kult. Thanks so much to Juan for asking me to be a part of this awesome collaboration with so many rad people. I knew right away which paperbacks from hell that I wanted to talk about, so let's get right into them. First up is a classic, The Nest from Gregory A. Douglas. This is a zebra book. It was published in 1980. Look, this book sucked me in hard. It pulled me in, beginning right in chapter 1. This had really great writing, and I loved the premise of an island cut off trying to survive together. I mean, look, this is mutant cockroaches eating people. Do I really have to say anything else at this point? Mutant cockroaches eating people on an island that's kind of been cut off. So awesome. This book was kind of poetically horrifying. It was just a blast. Fantastic writing. Loved it. The Nest. Gave it 4.5 stars. The other book I wanted to mention, which is another zebra book, it's called Dark Souls. Awesome cover there, you can see, really cool cover. This had an amazing, engaging storyline with another perfect setting, a small mountain town, one of my favorites. So this bad boy has graveyards, it has small town sheriffs, it has seances, it has a rad villain called the Shadow Man. So good. I had such a good time with this book that I actually made myself slow down as I read. I just was enjoying it so much. Could not recommend this one more. I gave it 4.5 stars. Dark Souls by Barry Porter. That's all I have today, guys. Thanks again, and please come check me out on Instagram at The Book Kult.
Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus. Thank you to Juan for inviting me to be a part of this video, and I was trying to decide which books to talk about, and my initial thoughts were to talk about some favourite authors like Kathy Koja or Bernard Taylor, but I feel like I recommend them all the time, so I should take this opportunity to talk about some lesser known authors and books. First up is Rebecca Moon by Michelle Spence, which was published in 1983. This is set in a small town, and the character of Rebecca is a teenage girl, and she has some rather powerful mind control, psychic abilities. She is able to make these people in the town do things she wants them to do, and yeah, things get pretty sinister. And there is another character, Laura, who is a psychiatrist who moves to town to be the school counsellor, and she starts to suspect Rebecca as being behind a bunch of strange goings on that have been happening in the town. This is definitely one of my favourite hidden gems. For a start, it has an amazing cover, definitely one of my favourites, and the story itself is excellent. There are some really unsettling scenes that play out as we see exactly what Rebecca can do. Next up is the Witches series by James Dark. This is a series of 8 books, originally published in 1983 also, and let's just take a moment to really enjoy what are without doubt some of my favourite covers. This is set during the English Civil War, and we're following a witchfinder, so think films like Witchfinder General and Mark of the Devil, who is travelling around the country with his crew to interrogate people that have been accused of witchcraft. And our protagonist is a former soldier called John, who is on the trail of the witchfinder for revenge, because the witchfinder killed his father and has kidnapped his girlfriend. So these are pure pulp, but they're really good pulp, and they're a great mix of horror and adventure. There is a lot of action and violence, bit of sex and sleaze. They're very entertaining. I have admittedly only read the first 3 so far, but I really enjoyed them, and I look forward to reading more of the series. And last up, I wanted to include a bit of vintage YA, and this is the Power series by Jessie Harris. Originally, the first one was published in 1992. And we're following another teenage psychic here, so apparently I have a thing for that. And this one is a character called Mackenzie Gold, known as Mac, and she has psychic abilities, and each book is like a standalone story following her and her friend Lilycat and her boyfriend Aiden, and yeah, the various crazy situations she finds herself in where her psychic abilities play a part. Again, we have some fantastic cover art here with these amazing neon colours, and yeah, I don't know why they didn't continue that through the last 2 books of the series, but okay. These are a lot of fun, and they also do tackle some serious topics, so yeah, I thought the combination worked really well. The characters and their relationships felt really genuine, they're really well written. It's a shame there are only 8 books because I would absolutely read more. So that's it from me. I hope you enjoy any of these books if you decide to give them a read.
This is Alex with Bookworm of the Damned, and first off, I would like to thank Juan for inviting me to be a part of this collaboration video, and secondly, I would like to note that it is such an honor to be amongst all of these booktubers who are so tremendously talented. Now, I could go on for hours about how much I love vintage horror paperbacks, because they bring me back to a time when I was a young teenager, and the highlight of my Friday nights was going to a used bookstore and trying to get as many books as I could with the allowance that I had, which a lot of times I would have to return for the second week to get more books, and then the third week, fourth week, so on and so forth. You know the problem. But without me rambling on, here are 3 vintage horror paperbacks that I feel should totally be spoken about more. First up is The Sentinel by Jeffrey Convitz, and this focuses on a fashion model by the name of Allison who has recently moved into a brownstone apartment complex. Eventually, she starts to engage with her neighbors, but the more she does this, the more she starts to realize there is a darkness bearing down upon her, and her being here might not be an accident. Last year, I recommended this to my longtime friend Jennifer because she was looking for satanic literature. And even though I had read this before, I buddy read it with her, and I absolutely loved how she reacted when it came down to the twists and turns. However, even though this is an enjoyable read, it is dated. Even still, I feel like this is original, and I plan to someday read its sequel. Next up is When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom, which this opens up with a story that's titled the same as the book, and it introduces a young pregnant girl by the name of Sally Ann who has become trapped underground. Then, when no one finds her, she is forced to adapt to her subterranean surroundings. Following that shocker is the story called Beauty Is, which this introduces a disfigured woman by the name of Martha. And as we continue reading, we discovered that Martha had become the target of her father's abuse, which, due to a traumatic event, evil has entered her and has now affected her mentality. This book had been recommended to me by the author known as Selah Janelle, and my only regret is I didn't read this sooner because it scared the ever-loving living hell out of me. The psychology behind this is something that haunted me for days to come, and this is a good example of how you can have a book that doesn't rely on gore or excessive violence and still be extremely disturbing. And last is Sweetheart, Sweetheart by Bernard Taylor, which this introduces the character named David, who one day discovers his sister-in-law and his twin brother died 10 days apart from one another on her property. Then, after David inherits that property, he eventually discovers there's a sinister force roaming around that has now set its sights on him. This had been recommended to me by the booktuber known as the Bookubus, and upon buddy reading this with my good online friend Hanny, we quickly discovered this was a book that we could not put down because the further you read, the more it rushed your adrenaline. And once we got to the end, I had no other choice but to stare at the wall and just try to process everything that had just gone down. Well, those are my picks. I hope everyone enjoyed them. Once again, thank you, Juan, for inviting me to participate. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. And until we see each other again, sweet nightmares.
I'm CriminOlly, and I want to talk to you about a personal holy grail paperback from hell of mine, Chainsaw Terror by Nick Blake. So this is a book that came out in 1984. I read it back in the 80s, and a while ago tried to track down another copy of it and discovered that prices of it had gone through the roof, as vintage paperbacks tend to. It's a very difficult book to get hold of because it was only published in the UK. There is a French edition that was published in translation under the Gore line of books in France. But the UK edition, or the English edition, was only ever published in the UK, I believe. And it was fairly quickly taken off the shelves by the publisher. So the history of the book is that Sean Hudson, the British horror writer, was hired by the publishers to write a novelisation of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There was some kind of rights issue, and they ended up not being able to do that, but they decided to get Hudson to write just any old book with chainsaw in the cover, in the title, because they thought that would attract punters and sell well. So Chainsaw Terror was born. There was an outcry, or some kind of outcry. There were certainly complaints about it. So the publishers received complaints about it. W.H. Smith's, which is a big like newsagents and bookstore in the UK, apparently refused to stock it. And the publishers decided that in the face of that backlash, they should not print any more copies of it. So copies of under this title, Chainsaw Terror, are very difficult to come by as a result. It was subsequently republished a couple of years later as Come the Night, so the actual book is identical. It just had a different, slightly less controversial cover. I've managed to get a copy of that one as well, rather pleasingly. So what's it about? So, well, basically it's about a guy killing people with chainsaws. So let me read you the blurb. Edward Briggs seems like a normal man, not very friendly maybe, but then who wouldn't be withdrawn after witnessing that bloody family tragedy? Edward still lives in the house where it happened. That's a little strange. So's his love for his sister. He doesn't like it when she goes out. He'd much rather she stayed indoors with him, always, in the cold, soundproof house with the cellar workshop and the big blood-stained workbench and the tools. So yes, Edward Briggs is a maniac. He kills his sister in the book, as well as a number of other women. There's a like journalist character who's kind of looking into the disappearances, who's effectively the hero of the book. And it is very, very gruesome indeed. Apparently, even this version is censored. So Sean Hudson apparently wrote a longer manuscript, and there are rumours of versions of that manuscript having floated around over the years, but it's never actually been published. But yeah, it's a very gruesome book. It involves a lot of power tools. It involves incest, necrophiliac incest, and every other horrible thing you could possibly imagine. But yes, a personal favourite of mine, because of the wonderful trashiness of the cover and because it's so difficult to get hold of.
Hey guys, it's Katie from Death by Paperbacks. I'm here today to talk about some of my favorite paperbacks from hell. First up is Hot Blood, edited by Jeff Galb and Lon Friend. This is an erotic horror anthology series. There's 12 books in this series. Each one contains roughly 20-25 short stories by some really well-known authors. There's Jack Ketchum, Graham Masterton, Robert McCammon. I believe Edward Lee is in one of them. So some really, really good content in these books to go with these fantastic covers. This one was published in 1989, and then the rest of them were just sort of sprinkled across the 90s. Here's the second one, again with this this lady on the front, and then you've got these cool goblin hands that are coming around. The third one I have is a hardcover. I do wish it was the paperback, but I came across a hardcover and couldn't pass it up. So again, we have this lady, and we've got these big demon wings. And the stories inside are awesome. Some of them are really funny. Some are really gross. Again, with these really cool spikes and scales on her back. She's got a forked tongue. This is the fourth one. And then I also have the fifth one here as well. After the fifth one, I think the covers just aren't as great in my opinion. The content is fantastic still in all 12 books, but I do prefer the first 5 books when it comes to their original covers. But yeah, I definitely recommend checking them out if you can find them out in the wild. They're really, really good reads, and some of them will make you laugh. Some of them are a little cringy. Some are actually kind of romantic in a weird way, but definitely, yeah, all with an erotic edge. But you've got vampires, werewolves, demons. You've got like kind of wishes gone wrong, revenge stories, just about everything you can imagine going on. They all just have this sort of sexier, erotic plot line. And then next up is The Dogs by Robert Calder. This one was definitely not picked for the content. This one was 100% picked for the cover. I love the big bold red print on here, and even the bold writing of the author and the everything else. And then we've got these 3 snarling dogs at the bottom, which I think are really fun. And then on my copy, I have some blue edging on my copy. I don't know if that's normal or just on this one. This copy is a little bit beaten up, but I could not pass up this cover. The story on the inside, I don't necessarily recommend. I hate to say that, but it's not the greatest animal attack book I've ever read. It's actually quite ridiculous. And there is a really, really graphic dog fight scene. If animal violence bothers you, I would not recommend reading this book. And then there's also a very, very vividly described dog mating scene that I just felt was super unneeded and obnoxious and really makes you a little uncomfortable reading it, but it's in there, and if you want to experience that, pick this one up. And then just as an honorable mention, I have The Tribe by Barry Wood. This is a new book for me. I just found it recently, but I love this cover, this all black blank cover with an ominous face coming at you in the middle. And when you open up the step back cover, it has 4 ominous faces and this man's silhouette. I just think that's really fun, and I'm really excited to read this one. If you've read it, let me know what you thought about it. I'd love to know. And that's it. Thanks, guys, for watching. Thanks so much, Juan, for allowing me to be a part of such an amazing collaboration. The group of people is just fantastic, and I'm really honored to be a part of this. Thanks, guys.
Hey y'all, it's Crystal from Fiberartsy. So we're talking about Paperbacks from Hell. I've got 3 cool covers I want to share with you today that I'm calling Creepy Cradles, or What Has Happened to the Children. So we're going to start with The Unborn by David Shobin. Look at that creepy cradle. So this one, a woman has volunteered for a sleep study at this research lab. She doesn't divulge that she is pregnant. She probably should have. Things don't go well for her, and really it's a story of also about computer intelligence and the kind of technological manipulation of mankind, as it says here in the back. So basically, if you're pregnant, let your research doctors know. I've got When the Wind Blows by John Saul. What is happening? Oh no. When the wind blows, the children will cry. The children were waiting for centuries, waiting for someone to hear their cries. Now 9-year-old Christy Lyons has come to live in the house on the hill, the house where no children have lived for 50 years. Now little Christy will sleep in the old-fashioned nursery on the 3rd floor. Now Christy's terror will begin. When the wind blows, the children must die. Dun dun dun. It's gonna be horrific. By the scream of this lady here. Out of the night, out of the past, the terror comes. Sounds amazing. Last but not least is Cursed Be the Child by Mort Castle. Another creepy cradle. This one's quite gothic and fancy though. But we have a clawed little hand poking out there, which is, that's pretty fun. So in the past, we have a young girl named Lysette. Well, who, she lays there dying, and on her deathbed, she's basically vowed to get revenge, no matter how long she has to wait. In the present, we meet a young girl named Melissa, who loves spending some time in her family's new home. Especially now that she has made friends with Lysette, the girl in the basement. I mean, I'm sure that's going to end very well for all parties. So yeah, these are some 3 pretty creepy cradles. And some nice vintage horror. So thank you so much, Juan, for asking me to be a part of this. I can't wait to see what everyone picks. All right, guys. See you later.
Hello there, this is Michael from the channel Horror Gardener. I'd like to thank Juan for inviting me to participate in this discussion of Paperbacks from Hell. So today I will be discussing 3 books. One's a recommendation, one's a slight recommendation, and the other one is a for sure read. You need to read this immediately. So yeah, let's jump into them. Alright, so the first book we're going to discuss is Songs of the Dead Dreamer by Thomas Ligotti. This is his first collection of short stories that was published, I believe, in 1986. Now, like all short story collections, and especially first ones, there are some hit or miss stories in it, but there is some really good gold within this series. Now, before I jump into my quick summary of this book, I just want to share some of the, how I should say, extremely positive reviews that I found on Goodreads regarding this book series, and hopefully enlighten some new readers what to expect. Have you ever read a book that was so awful that you hated it? I hope that somebody kicks you square in the balls. This is a terrible book, and Ligotti is a terrible writer. I regret every minute. About as scary as a damp towelette. Okay, so this book has been republished in 2015 by Penguin Classics, so it should be able to pick up quite easily nowadays. Yeah, this book is really, really good. Fans of H.P. Lovecraft, obviously, are going to love these sort of weird tales. It is slow, so be prepared. But yeah, I do recommend these kind of quiet terror tales that Thomas Ligotti puts out. Okay, so the next book that I want to recommend is Keeper of the Trillium by William H. Hallahan. This was first published in 1978, and it has one of the best covers I've ever seen. It's got a bear with an axe that's chopping a mouse in half, which actually takes place within the book. It's pretty great. So I first heard about this book when I was watching the movie Mandy, and they were talking about this font that was used in one of the scenes of the movie, and it was actually stolen from, or slightly influenced by, this book. So that's how this first came to my radar. I'm actually going to put up the cover so you can compare. So this one has probably the best cover out there. This teddy bear is actually in the book. It's a man whose daughter joins a Hare Krishna type cult, and he has to learn how to astral project himself so that he can fight the cult leader, who is putting his sort of spirit into various animated objects and killing people, particularly the parents of other kids. So yeah, this one is a recommendation. It's just for its sheer lunacy, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. And so the last book that I want to recommend is my favorite book I read in 2020, which was Manstopper by Douglas Borden. This is a killer dogs on the loose book. This book is great. It's pretty much got the POV of the killer dogs as they're running wild in this small town. They're eating people, they're eating kids, they're eating other dogs. They kill a guy while he's trying to eat pizza. It is just all over the top, and I loved this book. I do recommend, if anyone wants to read a good wild dog book, this is the one to pick up. Just fantastic. I love it a lot. Okay, that's it for my part. Thanks again to Juan for having me on here. I do appreciate being asked to participate, and everyone else have a great time reading these freaky books. Talk to you later. Bye.
Much like the 2010s were obsessed with the 1980s, the 1980s were obsessed with the 1950s. 50s pop culture was being revisited in every genre and every medium. Horror was no exception. No book better embodies this trend than Gila by Les Simmons. This book is exactly what it looks like. A horde of giant Gila monsters rampage through New Mexico. This is a 1980s take on the 1950s classic B-movie, The Giant Gila Monster, and of course, filled with plenty of that 80s goodness of blood, sex, and of course, viscera. This is all told from the refreshing lens of a female writer, Les Simmons. You can find this book in ebook and paperback form as it has been reprinted. The second book is something that I think kind of gets undersold in a lot of ways, and this is Nightblood by T. Chris Martindale. This book is often always kind of applauded and lauded for being kind of a men's adventure book meets a horror book, where essentially they talk about all the like big bombastic violence and gunplay and everything like that. It truly is normally sold as like Rambo meets Salem's Lot. I think that actually kind of undersells the book a little bit. I find this book is really nice in its quiet moments. You actually care about these characters. Yes, our character is a Vietnam vet, but he doesn't want to keep killing people. He's not obsessed with the war. It's not everything that's on his waking mind. He loves to read Harlequin romances. He has a romantic interest who is his own age. And believe me, considering some of the 1980s paperbacks from hell, that's a pretty big trait. Most of the time, a lot of these earlier books from this era, you don't get characters that you especially like, and that's mainly because a lot of people weren't people you'd especially like during this time period, especially if you're looking back through a modern lens. But this is the exception. I actually really do enjoy all of these characters, and you want them to survive and make it to the end. So that is what I love about Nightblood. It does have all the action and adventure and explosions that it's sold to have, but I do think it has a little bit more than just that. You can find this one fairly easily as it has been reprinted by Valancourt Books for their Paperbacks from Hell series.
Hi there, my name is Katrina and my channel is Katrina Brown, and I read a ton of horror, but I am kind of a newbie to Paperbacks from Hell and I haven't read a ton of them, but the ones I have read I've absolutely loved, and I'm so excited to talk about some faves right now. Starting with The Amulet by Michael McDowell. Like, wow, we have to talk about the cover, right? Because it is a paperback from hell. As you can see in the cover, there's some people very uncomfortable or dying or dead, wrapped up in this amulet, the chain from the amulet. So you might have guessed, this is a cursed object book. This was published in 1979, one of Michael McDowell's earlier works, and it is very brutal and a bloodbath, and I absolutely loved it. This is about a very bitter woman who kind of unleashes the amulet on a small town that she blames for all of her life, pretty much how her life ended up, and then her daughter-in-law and her best friend are unraveling the mystery between the amulet and these gruesome murders. This was written very cinematically. I feel like you can see every single blood drop in the imagery written in this book. Fantastic writing. It's so amazing. If you like unique kills, if you like very, very bloody scenes, this one is for you, and the characters are amazing. I loved the friendship in this and the mystery, and I could talk about this book for hours, all day, every day for the rest of my life. It was so good. So the next paperback from hell I actually found out in the wild, and that is The Auctioneer by Joan Samson, published in 1975. I picked this one up because it looked like a movie poster. It has this cool lettering on it, and yeah, I didn't know it was a paperback from hell until everybody was telling me it was. So I ended up reading it because I've heard great things, and I will say this is a slow burn, and boy oh boy, it had such a great payoff in it. This is more a psychological horror, more thriller style. It is about an evil auctioneer that comes to a small town, and every day he sells more and more. He auctions off more and more of the town, and it is very intense, I will say. For being a slow bird, it's always simmering, and then it starts to boil a little, and then it just like erupts at the end, and what a payoff. I absolutely love this story. I loved the family at the center of this story. I don't get very sentimental or attached to characters in horror books usually, but I was in this one. I really felt for them, and yeah, if you like psychological horror, especially on like a small town level or group thinking level, this is the one for you, and I highly recommend. I absolutely love this book, and I will be talking about it for a long time.
Hello, my friends. One of my favorite horror novels from the 1980s is this one, The Light at the End, by John Skipp and Craig Spector. John Skipp and Craig Spector, who were at the forefront of the splatterpunk movement in the 1980s. So, as you can imagine, this novel, it's kind of violent. This novel about a vampire haunting the New York subway system, which, frankly, seems like a good place for a vampire. This novel, which came out in 1986. First time I read this, it was probably the early 90s, and I just recently reread it. And this book really brought me back to that time. And this book is really full of the anxieties and the fears that people had in the 1980s. Anxieties and fears like crime and urban decay, things like that, you know, as well as vampires. So The Light at the End, great characters, a compelling plot, genuinely frightening at times with a lot of gore. So, what more could you want from a paperback from hell? The light at the end. I really recommend this book.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Sean.
I'm Bert.
Our channel is called
Story Time.
Thank you, Juan, for inviting us to take part in this.
Thanks, Juan.
Yeah, we're choosing our favourite sort of paperback from hell.
Yes.
Yours is literally a paperback from hell.
Literally.
So if you want to go first.
Okay. So for this, I've chosen Let's Go Play at the Adamses. This is by Mendel W. Johnson from 1974, I think. Let's check that. Yeah, 1974. It's kind of a psychological horror novel. Quite notorious. Very disturbing. It's about a babysitter who is looking after some children while the parents are away over the summer, and some neighbourhood kids who are sort of part of their sort of friendship group, and they decide to kind of tie up the babysitter and abuse her, and it becomes sort of gradually more and more distressing. It's a really heavy, claustrophobic novel. The writing is very stately, quite beautiful, and completely unfearful, and it is the book that I've read that has, I think, had the most visceral experience on me whilst reading it, and it's really stuck with me since as well. So I think for that alone, I think this deserves to be sort of more widely read, and it has a ending which I found it's almost sort of transcendent in how it emotionally, physically, psychologically puts you through the ringer. Absolutely loved this book. Be cautious, lots of trigger warnings, but yeah, that's my pick.
I have decided that that's not for me.
Not for you.
But what is for me is Katie, which is on Valancourt Press, and it's by Michael McDowell. It's published in 1982, but it's set in 1870s New York, and it's kind of like a penny dreadful. So it's quite rompy,
yeah.
But it's also like quite violent as well. There is like a dog death in it.
Good to know.
Yeah, not like, big focus, but it's there because Katie just gets a hammer out on anyone
all the time.
Yeah, Katie is just evil. She's also a psychic. She's just like she'll just murder anyone.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a fun murder as well, and it's also really tense because you're just like the other character is Philo Drax, and you're kind of really rooting for her. But will Katie kind of get the better of her. There we go. And a
love a
beautiful
bit
cover.
of McDowell's always great.
Yes. Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello, and welcome to the segment of Plagued by Visions that's apparently sponsored by Satan. Now, it wouldn't be a Plagued by Visions segment if we didn't focus on the disturbing, more unsavory side of vintage horror. Usually, when we think of vintage horror paperbacks, with their wacky, eye candy covers and ridiculous premises, we tend to think of something on the lighter, more unimpactful side. I'm here to show you, however, that this isn't always the case for books of this nature. The first book that I have for you comes from the man that scared Stephen King himself so much that he was compelled to dub him the scariest man in America. I'm talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jack Ketchum, and specifically his first novel ever published, Of Season, from the year 1980. This copy that I hold right here, which was the original 1980 edition published by Ballantine, is actually the censored version, for it was deemed much too graphic and bleak by publishers at the time to allow it to roam free on bookshelves. It wasn't until 2006 that Leisure Books published a widely available uncensored edition that retained all of the original violence and the much bleaker ending than the one 1980 audiences got. Despite the censoring and editing efforts, however, the original version still retains an unshakably nauseating power to it, and it's told in that traditional dry, highly magnified and cruel style that makes Ketchum writing so exquisitely macabre. Even if censored, it still managed to rouse quite a level of controversy and protest during its original release, for it delivered a dose of extreme horror that nobody at the time was ready for, forever changing the landscape of horror fiction, for better or for worse. I believe this book's gruesome legacy speaks for itself, so read it if you dare. Next, I want to tell you about 1992's Penance by Rick R. Reed. And this particular horror paperback was part of Dell's Abyss line, which Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell cites as the last hurrah, or the death rattle of vintage horror paperbacks, both in terms of the chronology but also in the involved book design and marketing. These Dell Abyss titles were marketed as the new, strange, bizarre, and brutal line of horror writing, complete with transgressive premises and never before explored story modes in some cases. Penance most certainly delivers on this promise of being a new frontier in horror. Here, Reed writes unflinchingly about a deranged serial killer who targets child sex workers, and believe me, the descriptions of child abuse, child murder, and the brutal, grimy nature of street life in this hellscape of Chicago are all laid bare, with ferocity and brutality to spare. And lastly, in this little disturbing horror taste test, I have for you The Night Walker by Thomas Tessier, first published in 1979. At surface level, this is a seemingly conventional werewolf story. It's about a man cursed to suffer through transformation. However, Tessier's style really invokes the weird, off-putting, and dubious nature of this transformation, and portrays so well the visceral and unbearable process of losing one's humanity and sanity, so that this tale becomes a lot more psychological, a lot more subdued in its hues of monstrosity. And I must say, subdued hues really fit this werewolf story quite well. It is quietly macabre but unbearably loud in its implications, and there's also a scene where the werewolf eats period blood, so I rest my case, I guess. And there you have it, some disturbing vintage horror for your thoughts. Now let's move on and see what else all of these wonderful people who are collaborating here have waiting for you. Peace.
Hi everyone, I'm Coral from Pretty in Paper Cuts, and I'm here to tell you about two vintage books. One that I really love, one that has a great cover but is kind of not very good on the inside. The first one here is a book that I did love. This is The Godsend by Bernard Taylor, and this was published in 1976. This is a classic evil child story. It's pretty straightforward. This is about the Marlowes. They're a young family. They've already got, I believe, 3 or 4 children at the start of this story. The youngest one is only a couple months old, so very recent baby. And they meet a woman at the park who is kind of strange. She's very pregnant. She talks about having multiple kids, but she's young, and she acts like she doesn't really know what to do around kids, which is strange for somebody who has multiple children. They go back to their house, and later that evening they found that the woman has tracked them down somehow, and she stays for dinner. The Marlowes feel like she's imposing on them, but they're not really sure what to do about it. And wouldn't you know it, finally when they get the woman to leave, kindly, her water breaks and she ends up giving birth at their house. She abandons this baby. It's a girl, and the Marlowes thought possibly they might want to have more children. In particular, Mrs. Marlowe, she wants to have another girl, so they keep her. They name her Bonnie. She's got beautiful blonde ringlets and dazzling blue eyes, and they call her Little Bonnie Blue Eyes, and she's so adorable. But things start happening around Little Bonnie Blue Eyes, and you're always kind of wondering, is Bonnie doing this? Is this intentional? Is this just really terrible childhood accidents that are coincidences? I think the biggest part of this that I like is I feel like in this trope mostly it's the woman who is having these problems, who is the one who is, you know, ringing the alarm bell, but in this instance it's the father, which is kind of a cool play on the trope. The next one here is The Gilghoul by Henry W. Hotterman. This is far and away my most favorite, like, Paperbacks from Hell cover. It's a photograph of a sculpture. It's beautiful. However, the book inside is not very good. This was actually published in 1990, which makes it kind of a more recent vintage paperback. However, it has a lot of old school ideas about things, particularly this hits on the AIDS epidemic, marriage, females, things like that. This is about a young couple, Karen and David, and they are quickly approaching their wedding day. On their wedding day, Karen is walking down the aisle. She starts to feel a little bit strange, but she makes it all the way to the altar, and at the altar, her husband, her future husband, David, lifts up her veil, and underneath is the face of a corpse. And basically the whole book is trying to figure out what's wrong with Karen, why she has this ghoul-like appearance. And my favorite part of this book is that it's really just her face that's all creepy and old and dead looking. The rest of her body seems to be fine. In fact, the author multiple times mentions how great her breasts are, so we do have that to look forward to, of course. This really is just kind of a supernatural revenge story that I felt didn't really need to involve the people it did. It was like this revenge story, but it wasn't really a revenge story about the people involved. It was kind of boring, but it did have some really funny, weird, bad, cringy parts to it, which I do enjoy that part of the book, of course, but it was kind of a slog to get to. However, you know, if you can find a copy of this, the cover more than makes up for it. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Juan, for including me. I will see you guys later. Goodbye.
Hello, it's Regina from Regina's Haunted Library. I wanted to thank Juan for including me in this group, and I'm thrilled to share with you some of my favorite paperbacks from hell. Now, this was a little tough because I have an entire shelf dedicated to this type of fiction, and nothing is better than some of these covers. So it was hard to choose, but I came up with 3, which are pretty representative of my collection. Number 1 is Spawn by Sean Hudson. This is a pretty famous one. I think it's also featured in Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell book, which I own. I included this one because I actually found it in the wild, which is always a thrill. When you can go on eBay and maybe sometimes even pay a lot of money for a book like this. When I found it at my used bookstore for like, I don't know, $2, I think I probably squealed in the bookstore and then was looking over my shoulders to make sure no one else had spotted it so I could, you know, leap on it. But yeah, it's really fun. I haven't read this one, so I can't tell you if it's any good, but you just have to love that evil baby on the cover. This one is another one I found in the wild, and I haven't read any of these, I have to say, but this one is called Black Dawn by D.A. Stern. So we have Black Dawn, fear the day, fear the night, fear the darkness inside of you. And finally, this one I was gifted, and it's one of my prized possessions, and I don't want to read it because I don't want to mess it up. This one is called The Scream by John Skip and Craig Spector. And what's so special about this book, I'm going to do this very carefully so I don't mess it up. It comes with a poster. Inside this mouth it's like a hellscape, like Dante's Inferno. It's so cool. So those are my 3 paperbacks from hell. I hope you enjoyed taking a look, and I can't wait to see what everyone else chooses.
Hey everybody, I'm Kelsey from the channel Slime and Slashers, and I'm so excited to be a part of this collab. Thank you so much, Juan, for asking me to join in on the fun. It really means a lot. Alright guys, I'm super pumped to talk about some paperbacks from hell. So I'm just going to mention a few today that I've read and enjoyed. First book I'm going to suggest is The Breeze Horror by Candace Caponegro. This one looks like it could be about a haunted windowsill or haunted curtains. No, this is actually a zombie type of story, but it's not your traditional zombie story. These zombies featured in here are a little bit different, and that's why I personally really enjoyed this. Now, it's not absolutely a perfect read. The characters, in my opinion, aren't the strongest. What you want to read this for, like I said, is the different take on zombies, some awesome splatterpunk type of elements in this, lots of gore. Lastly, but not least, you should check this out because there's this whole Ozzy Osbourne type of scenario where a dude bites off a pigeon's head, and it's pretty wild. The next suggestion I have is Book of the Damned by D.A. Fowler. Here's an old school copy and a new edition that has been released by Capricorn Literary, which I think is so important that they're resurrecting some old school horrors so that we can continue to read them even if we don't happen to have a vintage copy. Essentially, the premise is a book about a book, but it's also about so much more. Does this story feature a penis used as a lightsaber? Yes, it does. But it's got a lot more than just that. Overall, this is a zany story filled with dark humor, but it's also bleak at the same time and delivers the horror. So it has gross out horror, but it also has really off-putting type of horror too. And last but not least, quickly, Geek Love by Catherine Dunn. The other two books I talked about were more fun, more off the wall. You know, you don't have to take them completely seriously, although there are parts that are effective and creepy and scary. Geek Love, however, is quite different. This is for people who would enjoy strong character development, a character-driven story. One of the strengths of this book is the setting. We're following a family who runs a traveling carnival, so you get to ride along with them as they travel across the country and set up their carnival. But this is no normal family. They're pretty messed up. The mom and dad, who are the head of the family, they bred their own freaks to ensure the longevity of their own carnival. And so that right there makes them a little bit out there, because that's not what just any mom and dad chooses to do when they start a family. This is great, like I said, if you just love some really well-written characters. Well, that's it for me. Those are my suggestions in case you guys want to check out a few old school paperbacks from hell and dip your toe into the water, because those books that I suggested I really personally enjoyed. I think you guys could like them too. And I want to say thanks to Juan again. See you guys.
Hi there, it's Lydia from Typical Books. Thank you so much, Juan, for inviting us to talk about Paperbacks from Hell. What a neat topic, because this particular book is the eye candy directory. It's just such a good spot for people who want to flesh out an already existing collection, or if you're just getting into horror, want to know what greats to pick from, or if you like coffee table books that have fantastic artwork. It's like being in a video store as a kid, if you were a kid when there was video stores, and getting to see all those things. There's nothing quite like it unless you have a very good horror bookstore to find books like this in. Otherwise, I found a lot of them when I was a teen or my early 20s, and I got to visit some cool little used bookstores. And there were a few right near my house. I didn't have a lot of money, so I would often buy books, and I learned this trick from my mother: buy a whole bunch of books and then return them to the used bookstore when you're done reading them. It turns into a lending library, and it's kind of horrible. You know, I don't recommend that at new bookstores, but used bookstores kind of welcome that behavior. But there are books like Paperbacks from Hell that are worth hanging on to. And you can tell from the yellowed paper over here what books I'm going to talk about. These ones. Now, some of these books are in here, and we've all talked about really cool books. I don't know if we've already heard from a lot of other booktubers, or if we're going to hear from a whole bunch of other ones. There are really great specific books that are showcased in Paperbacks from Hell from Grady Hendrix and Will Errickson. I will mention Will Errickson. Big fan of the blog Too Much Horror Fiction, and while the long form journalism, the essay that is found within the pages of Paperbook from Hell, I think it's largely Grady Hendrix, but Will Errickson did a lot of this work as well, so I take them as a team when it comes to this particular book. But the website Too Much Horror Fiction, if you're interested in these books and want to see more reviews and more conversation about them, check it out. But these books with the yellowed spine, books with weird covers on it, like these books. This is Paperbacks from Hell to me, because they were books that had obviously lived a life. They are cracked spine, pre-owned. People might have highlighted or underlined things. You will find the famous movie quotes from a lot of these books, if there was movies made of them, and I think all of these there was. But this particular books came from a horror section that was right beside the red velvet curtain and beaded curtain red light area that I never went into, the adult section. So I was like reading these weird books, or like the backs of them, and looking at these weird covers with untoward things on them, and then these gentlemen were filing past. So I think it heightened the effect of these paperbacks that could have come straight from hell in my young mind. Psycho by Robert Bloch, The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson, Hell House by Richard Matheson, The Omen, not like The Omen, but it's like The Omen 4 or whatever, but it's The Omen, and Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. You might be saying, why not Rosemary's Baby? I like this one better. And it had something more untoward to me in this coupling, and the fact that all of these men were in on this quite nefarious plot, and it wasn't just one woman and her baby, which I couldn't relate to. I can relate to this, not as much anymore, but I think I could relate to the fear of this when I was a teen, right? So yeah, these creepy old paperbacks with their very forward-thinking stories really are paperbacks straight from hell for me. My copy of Hell House, incidentally, fell in half the day that Richard Matheson died, and I do need to replace it, but it's such a special copy to me because I had picked it up in those formative years. Paperbacks from Hell that sent me there too. Thank you so much, Juan, for inviting us all to talk about this bouquet of brutality that are the books found within the pages of Paperbacks from Hell. So enjoy, and I cannot wait to have an ooky spooky day along with you watching the rest of these videos.
Well, wasn't that just lovely? Oh, you thought we were done? That was only day one of your punishment. There's still infinite days left. I'll let you take a break, but I'll see you very, very soon.